Okay, good morning, colleagues. How are we doing? I see we have 79 participants so far. Number is increasing. Maybe we give a few more minutes before we officially start. Silva, are you there?
Yes, I am, Wycliffe.
Should we give a few more minutes, like we start at 8:05, or shall we begin?
I think we can wait a bit because we only have 61 people from the audience ring. So
okay,
let's wait maybe for another 2 minutes.
Okay, so we can start at 8:03. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, good evening, or good midday, wherever you are. This is a global consultation and we are in different time zones. My name is Wycliffe Otieno, Senior Advisor Education in UNICEF New York. You know, UNICEF and UNESCO are the anchor lead agencies for Action Track 1. And so on behalf of UNICEF and UNESCO, I would want to welcome you all and to note that on this Action Track 1 and for today, as we have been through the process, we have not just UNICEF, but UNESCO as the lead anchor agencies with key colleagues. Let me single out those with whom we are working very closely on this and who are instrumental in this exercise so far. We have Justine Sars, who is the Chief of Section for Gender and Inclusion, Christopher Castle, who is the Chief of Section for Education and Health, and we're also joined by Elisa, who is the World Food Program Secondary to the TEST Secretariat. So on their behalf and on behalf of our two agencies, I would want to welcome you all onto this particular first global webcast. We are delighted that so many member states are able to make it into this, as well as representations from a broad array of agencies tuning in from different parts of the world. I would, as I welcome you, want us to note that we have 1.5 hours for this particular consultation. We want to make the best use of time. And so let me go into a few housekeeping rules that will help us to have a successful consultation webinar. As we do so, please note that we are having 2 languages for this particular webinar simultaneously, that is English and French. And there is live interpretation to keep us all informed. If you want to select your language, please click on the icon on the globe at the bottom of your screen, and then you select whichever language you are most comfortable with. We also ask you to kindly post comments and questions related to the discussions of the webinar throughout the event via the Q&A function within the Zoom application. As much as possible, we'll try to answer all your questions and address all the comments within this particular section, within this particular meeting. And if possible, those that we will not be able to respond to, we will be doing so in writing. And again, please, colleagues, know that you may not be able to post comments or questions via the function. So use via the chat function. So kindly only use the Q&A section that is provided. So many participants amongst us actually affirms the Secretary General's own vision of having a truly consultative process that will lead us to a truly transformed education for our children. So please do feel welcome. You are part and parcel of this, and I would not want us to manage time very effectively. And therefore, I'll want to introduce in the next minute or so the co-leads within the structure of TES for the Action Track 1. We are having two countries as co-leads with one stakeholder agency, that is the SD for Youth. The other countries are Italy and Namibia. On this particular score, then, colleagues, and without wasting so much time, let me hand over to Italy for a self-introduction, followed by Namibia, and then SD for Youth. Over to you, colleagues.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon and good morning or good evening. I'm Luca Grandi. I'm the diplomatic advisor of the Minister of Education since 2 years. I'm a career diplomat and I've served abroad in many countries, China, South Africa, UK, India, and I served in the Foreign Office, in the Political Affairs Department, in the Development Cooperation Department. And it's a great honor to work and to be a co-lead of this Action Track 1, and looking forward to the discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Namibia?
Good afternoon, Wycliffe and esteemed colleagues. My name is Sanet Steenkamp. I'm the Executive Director for the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture in Namibia, basically the accounting officer for the ministry. And with our colleagues, Italy and our youth representative and our Namibian team, we are absolutely delighted today to have this opportunity to engage with so many of our member states and stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Steenkamp. Over to SD for Youth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Nguyen. I'm the SDG for Youth representative, which is a global group of 100 education activists who are young, fighting for quality education. I'm also the International Education Officer from Family Planning New South Wales. It's a pleasure to be here today and to see all of you joining us in this consultation. Perhaps we can now go back to the slides now, and we can go through the process and the progress to update. Thank you. So thank you for joining us all here today for this consultation. As you all know, the Transforming Education Summit is so important because it is trying to tap into how we are going to address the fact that the SDG 4 quality education targets are off track. So the SDG 4 was off track prior to COVID-19. The learning crisis happened before it, and there's 262 million children and youth out of school. 60% of children and adolescents are not achieving minimum proficiency in reading and math. So there's inequality, there's inequity, there's discrimination happening in our education systems. And COVID-19 was a huge wake-up call for many of us around the world. 1.6 billion children and youth were affected by school closures. Many of them still are being affected. But COVID-19 was also an opportunity that showed us that it mobilized unprecedented levels of international solidarity, where we, for the first time, saw just how large this issue was and how, if we work together, we can really make change and transform education. And it forced us to rethink and reimagine to transform education. Now, when we say we're going to get back on track with SDG 4, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to go back on the same road. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to do exactly what we were doing before. It's about being imaginative, being brave, and having the courage and political leadership to make sure that these transformations take place. And the Transforming Education Summit is linked directly with the UN Secretary General's convene. So it's linked to a key element of the Our Common Agenda report. And it draws on the reimagining our futures together, a new social contract for education that was recently released. Next slide, please. Now, the summit is important. So it's really key that it doesn't become just a talk fest, but rather it really mobilizes some actions. So the summit aims to strengthen and accelerate implementation of existing multilateral agreements, particularly the 2030 Agenda. And it aims to galvanize action at national and global levels and support setting focus areas put forth by the SDG 4 high-level steering committee resources. And it falls under 3 key pillars. So in order for the Transforming Education Summit to be meaningful, it needs to be country-led. So different contexts have different education systems that are very unique and specific. So that's why it's really important that it's country-led and significant emphasis placed on engagement at the national level. And member states are encouraged to actively engage throughout the process. So that includes in the lead up to the Transforming Education Summit, the summit itself, as well as the follow-up. Secondly, we need to make sure it's inclusive. So we're going to bring together all those relevant to the advancement of the 2030 Agenda. And it's so important that we engage with all these partners, including youth, teachers, academia, international organizations, and civil society and private sector. And thirdly, with the Transforming Education Summit, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're going to be building on existing efforts. So it is prepared with full engagement of UNESCO and other UN entities, and it seeks to further strengthen existing efforts and initiatives. Now, the Transforming Education Summit has 5 thematic action tracks, and each of these action tracks aims to spotlight key recommendations, evidence-based practices, and case studies to show how we can transform education on a larger scale. So the 5 action tracks include Action Track 1, which is where we are today with the consultation. So that is inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy schools. The second action track is learning and skills for life, work, and sustainable development. Thirdly, teachers, teaching, and the teaching profession. The 4th action track is digital learning and transformation. And the 5th action track is financing of education. So the thematic action tracks aims to identify evidence-based, innovative solutions that facilitate progress at speed and at scale. And it aims to mobilize concrete initiatives, commitments, and actions to drive progress at country level. Next slide. So with Action Track 1, these are some of the key questions we're going to be addressing as part of the action track. So as I'm reading through each of these action tracks, I really want you to have a think and reflect on your context. What does it mean for you? So question 1 is, what transformations are needed to ensure all learners can fulfill their right to education in a context of climate change, global pandemics, growing insecurity, and other societal changes on the horizon? Secondly, what good practices and innovations can be leveraged in the immediate, medium, and long term to advance the right to education for all? What's needed to go to scale and reach the most marginalized? And thirdly, how can governments and partners better support learners' holistic development and more just, safe, equitable, healthy, and sustainable futures? So these are the 3 key ideas, the 3 key questions we aim to address. And with this action track, there are 5 somatic theme areas. So we consulted with over 200 persons who brought in their expertise, who brought in their feedback, who brought in so much knowledge and experience in order to shape this action track. And the 5 working groups include Inclusion and Equity, which was co-led by GPE and UNICEF. Gender-transformative education, which was co-led by UNESCO, UNGAI, and Plan International. Safe schools, led by the Safe to Learn initiative. School health and nutrition, led by WFP. And education in emergencies and protracted crises, led by Education Cannot Wait. So it's been a pleasure seeing the consultations and seeing how the discussion paper for Action Track 1 has transformed over the past few weeks. We have engaged in multiple and widespread consultations with partners, co-leads, and the TESS advisor in order to really refine this document, but also to make sure that it's not just meaningless words, but really fine-tuning it with case studies and with evidence-based practices that are recommended by the people that we have been consulting with. The discussion paper was prepared with annexed with papers on the 5 thematic themes, which are key reference documents for the national consultations that are happening or will be happening soon. There's also guidance documents prepared on mainstreaming gender and education in emergencies and protracted crises to guide you further. And as I mentioned before, we're really trying to make sure that there are evidence-based practices so that we can see more clearly and visualize what does transforming education mean. So at the moment, there are good practice collations launched for submissions. As you can see on the slides, there's a form link right there. So you can definitely go check it out so then you can also submit any good practices you may know. The first batch was already collected before 20th of May for review. However, there's going to be ongoing submissions possible up to and leading up to the summit itself. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it on to you, Mr. Grandi.
Thank you very much, Maria. So, dear colleagues, it is impossible to reduce all the work that has been undertaken to define key areas of transformation and recommendation for Action Track 1 into a few slides. But allow me to highlight a few of our conclusions. First slide, please. First, the context. We note that progress, next slide, please. First, the context. We note that progress has been made globally in education in recent decades, but gains are fragile as COVID-19, violence, forced displacement, climate-induced disaster, and a growing backlash against gender equality threatens to widen inequalities in many contexts. The most marginalized learners continue to face multiple intersecting forms of discriminations, and access to education in emergencies and protracted crises are a global challenge. Children who do attend schools are too often targets of violence, discrimination, and exclusion for socioeconomic, disability, or migrant status, or their perceived or real sexual orientation, or gender identity, and far too many are unreached by school health and nutrition intervention. More transformative action are needed to ensure inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy school where all learners can thrive. More transformative actions are needed to ensure inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy school where all learners can thrive. Next slide, please. Inclusive, transformative education must ensure that all learners have unhindered access to and participation in education, that they are safe and healthy, free from violence and discrimination, and are supported with comprehensive care services within school settings. Governments around the world have committed to inclusive, equitable, and quality education to sustainable development goals, but many face roadblocks to a transforming agenda to achieve this. Roadblocks to this transformative vary depending on the country context, but could include limited, bold, transformative political leadership and will, and accountability frameworks, poor enabling environments, including legislation, policy and institutional framework, and weak capacity for enforcement, limited individual and institutional capacity, insufficient financing, a lack of long-term investment and planning, and limited resources allocation for education to reach the individual learner, especially the most marginalized. A high degree of risk aversion to taking the radical step to address the known cause of educational exclusion and underperformance, entrenched cultural and societal norms that may impede inclusion, equity, and equality. Next slide, please. I would like to recall some examples from countries that are overcoming roadblocks which demonstrate that, in fact, transforming education is possible. For instance, in order to develop and implement policies and legislation that protect rights, promote inclusion, prevent and address all forms of stigma, discrimination and exclusion, Namibia, Sierra Leone and United Republic of Tanzania have removed ban on pregnant girls and young mothers attending schools. Moreover, to build and sustain a culture of quality data production and dissemination, in Malawi and South Africa, the Accountability for Gender Equality in Education project has been supporting participatory methodology to monitor and evaluate gender equality in education, while in Italy, accountability to gender equality in education and in all other policy is carried out through a gender budgeting process, an annual gender budget report with an analysis of the state financial accounts. In Burkina Faso and Togo, in order to ensure continuous professional development of teachers, itinerant teachers with specialist skills are supporting and mentoring class teachers and providing ongoing support to students with specific needs. These examples prove that transforming education requires long-term and sustained political commitment, planning and investment through a quality education so that all learners are attracted to and stay in schools and learn, accompanied by specific programs designed to prevent dropout so that every children and young person can fully realize their right to education. Ensuring a strong foundation that begins with pre-primary education to enable all children to benefit from an early start and as a part of a lifelong learning. We know that if you start from pre-primary education and you have a long life learning, the possibility of success of a learner are much higher. Adequate domestic budget and resources based on realistic unit cost to guarantee good quality education are essential to reduce poverty, violence, unemployment, poor health, and gender inequality. Next slide, please. So, to realize this transformation, we call on government and their partners to build and sustain a culture of quality data production, dissemination, and use, develop and implement policies and legislation that protect rights, promote inclusion, prevent and address all forms of stigma, discrimination, and exclusion, prioritize and place equity, inclusion, and gender equality at the heart of education sector. Recognize teachers and educators as key partners and ensure their continuous professional support, invest in pre-primary education as the foundation of learning, development, and empowerment, design and implement targeted action to attract out-of-school children and youth, including migrants and refugees, to access or return to school where they can be accepted and supported to learn, counter harmful gender norms, attitude, and practices through gender transformation education, foster learning environments that are physically, mentally, and socially safe and conducive for learning, establish intersectoral partnership to ensure the health and well-being of learners, and finally engage youth, parents, communities as genuine partners to realization of inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy learning environment, not just as an optional add-on. So these are some recommendations. I believe that this work has been carried out with the support of all the experts and a consultative, extended consultative process, but we look forward to your more ideas and inputs from all of you. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Sylvain to explain how the audience can participate in the meeting through the Mentimeter. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Grandi. So, hello, everyone. So please use the digital device of your choice. So whether your tablet, laptop, or smartphone, and log in to www.menti.com and then type the following codes that you can see at the top of your screen. We will also post this code in the chat, so I'm reading it. 67 14 11 35. And then you can answer these questions that you see on your screen. Pour nos amis francophones, donc s'il vous plaît, veuillez vous munir de l'appareil numérique de votre choix et connectez-vous après au www.menti.com pour ensuite taper le code suivant 67 14 11 37 35 et répondre à la question suivante que vous avez aussi dans le chat. En un mot, quelle est la transformation clé qui, selon vous, est nécessaire pour garantir que les écoles soient inclusives, équitables, promotrices de santé et sûres? Merci beaucoup. So please, I repeat, you just have to go on www.menti.com and then use the following codes 67 14 11 35. You can see this code in the chat. We've got one contribution so far, so please don't hesitate to tune in and go to Menti. We've got more contributions coming in. Thank you. Pour les participants francophones, n'hésitez pas à poster votre contribution en français. Je répète la question. En un mot, quelle est la transformation clé qui, selon vous, est nécessaire pour garantir que nos écoles soient inclusives, équitables, promotrices de santé et sûres? Merci beaucoup. Thank you. We can see that we've got more and more contributions coming in. Thank you so much. We can see that financing and political will are coming up as major contributions. Pour nos participantes et participants francophones, n'hésitez pas à soumettre votre réponse en français également. Thank you so much. So now I will hand over to Namibia, Ms. Sanet Steenkamp, to take the floor. Ms. Sanet, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvain, and sincere thank you to all our esteemed partners for listening attentively. Thank you also to the two co-leads, Maria, for giving us such a fantastic overview of the real situation as it is experienced globally. I wish to reiterate here that when we talk about all these 1.6 billion and 262 million learners that are out of school or students out of school, we must remember that they are not just statistics. We must remember that these are children in our households, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, children who are to hold us as technocrats, policymakers, politicians really accountable one day for the kind of decisions that we are making, and the leadership and the political will and the commitment and the financing that we as countries provide to address or redress educational matters. I wish to thank also Mr. Grandi from Italy for providing us with the overview on the roadblocks, the key problems that we are facing, and the possible solutions. So now we will want to hear the views of others. There are two pertinent questions that I would like us all to pay attention to. And the first one that we look into, with the first view, what are the aspects of transforming education that should be really the top line advocacy when it comes to track action 1 during the pre-summit in Paris, and of course the summit in New York in September. So the first thing that would come to our minds, the aspects of transforming education that we should really take out there and prioritize and single out as the top line advocacy. And then the second question that we would like to have everybody's input on is, if you are asked to define a successful outcome for Action Track 1 from the summit in September 2022, what would that be? And then, of course, we will take any other questions for Track Action 1, and we will take it from there. We also wish to acknowledge that for the main, the sub-theme tracks that Maria has also mentioned under Track Action 1, we have the colleagues present who led these sub-themes, and we will, of course, also rely on their expertise to provide specific answers and questions. So I think we can now open up the discussions, keeping in mind the two pertinent questions that we would like you to not just think about, but to internalize and to then give your reflection and share it with us. Thank you so much. Sylvain, will you guide us as to the technical aspect of that?
So for these questions that you are seeing on screen, you can give your inputs, please, via the Q&A, and we will then publish them via the Q&A function.
So also just to mention that it has been shared, the link for the discussion paper, and then there were also guidance and guidelines provided as to how to go about with the questioning and the answering session. Thank you.
Much time.
And now I also know that we are a little bit ahead of time, but to be mindful of the possible number of questions that we will receive, we will now also look at the questions, and then we will moderate and direct as to the possible questions, possible answers to the two questions, particularly. Can you go to the chat?
So please don't hesitate to post your answers to these 3 questions or 2 questions that Sanet just asked via the Q&A function, and we will publish them afterwards. You can also provide your response in French, of course. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So if we look at some of the answers provided, we could see that WASH is quite pertinently mentioned, especially for a top priority or top advocacy, gender equality, and then comprehensive sexuality education. That's one of the key issues that stood out. And then we also hear that policy implementation. Policy should not just be a beautifully crafted documents, but they should actually be dedicated efforts to implement and execute what has been agreed on a policy level. We also see that the marginalized groups or populations in our own context per country should be served first. And then there is a opinion that we need to be mindful that environmental education is there, but environmental sustainability is not fully discussed in the first track. And then also concerns around healthy schools, but the lack of health and life skills missing from track 2. So that is just some guidance that we should take note of as we proceed. We also see that there should be a multi-sectoral approach and multi-sectoral partnerships that are essential, and that governments can certainly not do this by ourselves, that the expertise and the resources should be complementing and should be a collaborative effort between various partners. There's one key sentence which says that for me, and that's what Barbara says, the successful outcome for track action 1 should just be implement the promises that we are as countries are making, so that we don't fall short of that. So ladies and gentlemen, these are just some of the questions, the answers to the questions that you are posing. At one given point, we will ask for further intervention, of course, from your side, but please take note that these are some of the top issues, some of the key issues that you feel should be mentioned. The last one was homegrown school feeding, which is quite critical. We take note of the poverty, the hunger on a global level. And one of the key issues that was singled out in the chat box was the fact that homegrown school feeding, school gardens should be also prioritized.
So they are saying that.
So in the meantime, as we are receiving your responses, thank you so much. We are going to go back to the Mency presentation to look at the word cloud and see some of the results. Ms. Steenkamp is going to comment some of the results we're seeing on screen, so we can see that financing, for example, is coming in as a major contribution. Thank you. Ms. Tinkamp, over to you if you want to comment on the results of this World Cloud.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. As we could see, ladies and gentlemen, highly on the list are the key issues of financing, be it domestic resources that countries in their specific context should prioritize. And I think one can untease it further. How much of a country's national budget is actually assigned for education? What should it be? What would be the ideal? So there's a definite call that we should have a country having political commitment at the highest levels, of course, on a cabinet level, parliamentary level, presidential level, etc., and then the commitment to financing. And what I also see coming out quite clearly is the whole issue around gender equality. And the issue of gender equality is also well unpacked in the discussion paper. And everybody who reads the discussion paper will see that it has prominency in the discussion paper. So we see the issue of political will, big on finance, the issue around gender equality, investment. So it's investment also, and like I said, it's not just from government. What is the investment that the public sector, the development partners, the parents, the communities, the youth, what is it that when we talk about investment, what is it that we mean? The whole issue around innovation, innovative practices. Maybe it is time that we ask on a global level, as we do now on this consultative platform, that we ask uncomfortable questions around what worked for us and what worked for us very well. We saw that the 3 pillars are inclusivity, must be country-led, and it must be looking at our existing efforts as countries. But what if those existing efforts are not sufficient and require us to think differently and propose many more different innovative practices within our countries? So innovation definitely. Here we come back, ladies and gentlemen, the whole issue around food security, addressing issues of malnutrition, addressing issues of health, addressing issues of food and availability of food. I can see once more homegrown school feeding, quite prominent. There are countries already that are having fantastic best practices around homegrown school feeding and making the schools, the learners, the communities, and of course, the public sector much more accountable in terms of matching government funding in terms of homegrown school feeding. Other keywords that we have is, as you can also see there, is school meals. Some countries provide vouchers, others provide school meals. What are the best practices? I can also see the whole issue around disability and inclusivity. How do we address and how do we treat and how do we restore the dignity of our children living with disabilities? How do we ensure that for financing, because for example, we all know that if we provide a specific unit cost for a child in a mainstream, we should actually 5 times that amount give to a school or children who are enrolled in a school catering for children with special needs. So the whole issue around adequate financing for children with disabilities, catering for their needs, not just in school, but for them to have life and life skills so that they can have a dignified life after school. Eda, you really need to help me with more words.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tinkamp. So let's go back to the other 2 questions asked through the Q&A. So participants, please note that this is the interactive session. So please don't hesitate to post your comments via the Q&A. We encourage you to post your comments in English or French. Thank you.
I think Sylvain just led us again to look into the aspects of the two questions. We have talked a little earlier about them. What would you define as a successful outcome from the summit? We already mentioned one where we said, somebody said, gladly, please just implement the policies. And then, of course, the first one is the top line advocacy. So if we could have your views, we still have a few more minutes. So as we can see, we are now asking for your input in terms of the two particular questions. Of course, we will also go back and forth if there is a need for us to do so. We have just reviewed the key issues standing out for all of us, and I can see that all that is something that is dearly and closely to the hearts and the leadership of everyone present. So thank you for that. What we can see is that there is a call for multi-sectoral action. It is agreed that we can see now that there's a shared understanding on a global level, but also a shared responsibility from all of us. So I'm asking once more, give us your views, tell us what you think. It's important to us. Maria said earlier, it's not just about beautiful or meaningless words. It's truly about this platform is providing us an opportunity not just to internalize how we want to move forward and what do we want to commit ourselves on a global level. And I think we have sufficient time still for everybody to provide their input. Your voice count. Please share it with us. Is it also there? I would also like at this stage to ask Sylvain if there's any particular input that he still wants to make. I noticed that the whole issue around teacher support, we all know that quality teaching takes place in the classroom. And the key resource in the classroom is the teacher. So how do we as countries truly support our teachers? And that it came out one of the key issues that we also want to elevate as a top advocacy point in terms of transforming education. So that specific track action also spills into the quality of education that we need to provide in an inclusive and equitable, healthy and safe school. So those are some of the key issues that are still continuously being highlighted. And then, of course, most importantly, is that we cannot make decisions without listening, internalizing, discussing, educating, but also being educated by the youth. The voices of the children, the voices of the out-of-school youth, the voices of the in-school youth. And I think a global survey has been done with 8,000 children, online survey. Ladies and gentlemen, I recommend that you have a look at the outcomes. children's voices, raw, innocent, truthful, speaking truth to power. And that's what we want, the voices of the children. So one of the answers that you provided is that you would like the children's voices to be heard, and to be heard, not just to be heard, but to be internalized and to be responded and acted on. Sylvain, do you have anything else that you would like to share with us on the screen?
Not on the screen, everyone. You can see the results of the Q&A. If you click on the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A box, so you can still post your comments via and your responses to these questions via the Q&A box, and then you can see the results that have been posted by our team here, who's moderating the Q&A, and we can see the results to your comments and questions coming in. Thank you so much. For the French and Francophone speakers, sorry, the questions are in the chat, so just to read them out loud. La question 1 que nous vous posons sont: quels aspects de la transformation de l'éducation devraient faire l'objet d'un plaidoyer prioritaire pour le volet d'action 1, le pré-sommet ainsi que le sommet lui-même? Et la question 2 que nous souhaitons vous poser est: comment définiriez-vous un résultat positif pour le volet d'action numéro 1 du sommet? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Sylvain, for the intervention. Every sector and every stakeholder recognizes his role or her role. Yes, individually, we are not that strong, but as a collective, and if everybody recognizes what he or she signs up for in his or her particular role, we will be able to redress many of the issues that are of pertinent importance. So once again, the whole issue around the vulnerable children, displaced children, children of disability, that comes through quite strongly. I must also say there was the cost of disability. Of course, every country is at a different level of inclusive education. The integration, there's this whole debate going on in the world right now as to, do some countries still remain with special needs education in a special school setting, or do you fully integrate them in a mainstream school and inclusive school? Let us be frank and honest here that education is expensive, irrespective of whether it is for the child in the mainstream or the child in disabilities. But it is imperative that we also do recognize that special provision and targeted funding probably needs to be set aside in a particular country to cater for children with disabilities. So the issue of the classroom setting was also set there. A successful outcome here talks about secured funding for the next 15 years to make these recommendations possible. Now, we also know that every country has their own budget cycle. They may be over a 3 years budget cycle, but we all talk about 2030. So we have got 7 years. So what is the more realistic thing in terms of domestic resources that can be honored by countries? There is a request for us to look into and adopt a holistic approach where we address the barriers that are hampering access to education. I also want to add that probably the whole issue around not just access. Some countries have got wonderful access to education, but then we need to strengthen also the quality of the education that is provided. Then the holistic aspect of a child's education in terms of sports and arts. Everything is not just about academic streamlines. We need to look at the VTCs, but also the issue of what contribution can sports bring into the life of a child, or arts. Musa, can you just go up again? Go down.
Because I'm trying to.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am just highlighting taking us through on some of the questions, your responses to the questions. There's a last one that says the successful outcome at the summit will indeed, if there will be adoption by consensus. But then we also saw that earlier a participant said it's not just about the adoption and reaching consensus, but it is about that something tangible will happen. It's not just a talk show, as Maria said earlier. It's that something tangible will happen on a country level, that the political commitment will really in public state and should be held accountable for the commitments that countries are making. So it is for a specific outcome on a country level. Remember that it's context-based for every country. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to call if there are specific input from, I said earlier that all the coordinators for the sub-thematic themes under Track Action 1, they are available, they are the experts, they know who they worked with, who these 200 people were under their specialist care. I would now like to call upon them to gladly say something on the key thematic matters as we've summarized them now. So I think everybody has got a clear view. And I think if the coordinator for education in emergencies, if Mr. Nasser Al-Faqih is available, we would gladly want to hear for a paragraph, few minutes, what are the key issues that you've picked up and that you would like then to share with us in this public consultation. And of course, if I may then just ask thereafter, the coordinator for Healthy Schools, Ms. Carmen Urbano, please forgive my pronunciation. And let us start with those two coordinators first. Thank you very much.
Ms. Tinkham, thank you so much. Our colleague from Education and Emergencies is not logged in, unfortunately. So could we please invite Ms. Carmen Bourbano to tune in and turn her microphone and camera, please, to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've just learned that we can move on to Ms. Carmen Bourbano. May we kindly request you, ma'am, to turn on your microphone and also your camera, and just very briefly, in your view, reflect on the whole issue around Healthy Schools and also what has been put forward, your views. Thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Can I please ask you if you can hear me? I'm having problems with my connection. Can you hear me well?
We hear you very clearly, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. My name is Carmen Bourbano from the World Food Programme. We've had the pleasure to coordinate the organizations that have been providing their inputs and feedback related to school health and nutrition under Action Track 1. And I'm very glad to see a lot of conversation in the chat and inputs around the need to really focus not just on the learning. There was a really important comment in the chat that said, we need to focus on the learning, but we also need to focus on the learner. And I think that's probably, in a nutshell, what school health and nutrition is about. We cannot achieve learning if we don't also focus on the well-being of the learner, of the children. And there are a number of conditions that affect them, including undernutrition, which was mentioned in the chat, hunger. I think that one of the reasons why the issue of hunger and food insecurity has been mentioned so much today by different participants is because we are undergoing a massive food crisis around the world, and the collapse of food systems all over, not just because of the war in Ukraine, which I'm sure everybody has seen in the news, is very much top of mind these days, but because we have a system that is unsustainable in terms of nourishment and the ability to nourish ourselves and our food systems. So I understand that this is a very timely conversation around the imperative to ensure that children are well nourished. But not only that, a number of comments have also mentioned the need to ensure an integrated package of water, sanitation, health screening. There were mentions around students with disabilities and providing them with the support that they will need. There are also conversations around how to bring the health sector more in a partnership together with the education sector to make sure that we are looking after our children's well-being. So I think a lot of the comments in the chat are really pointing at the need for an integrated package of services and policies that look after the well-being, the nutrition, and the health of the children as a precondition to learning. I want to maybe end by mentioning the leadership of France, and in some of the comments, we've seen the true leadership of President Macron around the issue of school meals and school health and nutrition, but also the African Union. There are a couple of very important comments there about why the African Union is really focusing on these issues now, because they do consider this key issues that are fundamental for the education agenda of the continent. So I just wanted to highlight some of the voices that we've heard here today around the importance of investing in a holistic approach towards well-being, health, and nutrition of children. Thank you.
Ms. Bourbano, Carmen, thank you sincerely for sharing your thoughts and your views with us. And we certainly take note about the integrated package of services that you are making reference to and the best practices from the African Union and also of France. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to hand over to Dr. Chloe Favre, who is the main coordinator for Safe Schools. If Dr. Chloe is present, could we kindly ask you to switch on your microphone and also, should you so wish, your camera. Thank you.
Hi there, I am representing Dr. Favre for Safe to Learn initiative. My name's Zara Taylor-Jackson. I'm the Senior Advocacy Coordinator for Safe to Learn. We have been delighted to lead on the sub-theme of safe learning under Action Track 1, and we thank the many partners that have fed into the two-page discussion paper and our thinking around this. Many of my comments are simply, I guess, to echo what Carmen previously said. So I will not do so, but I will flag a couple of other things in addition. We have obviously been coordinating partners to feed in on safe learning under this theme, and really trying to put across within the context of Action Track 1 the idea that learning cannot happen when such widespread violence is taking place in and around schools. When we talk about violence, we talk about physical, psychological, and sexual violence. And of course that these are rooted in gender and gender social norms and discrimination and inequality. And so it's been really encouraging to see both gender equality and inclusivity in all of its forms come through so strongly in the discussion today. And that's been our experience as well with partners feeding in on this sub-theme. And so we really want to continue to, as along with what Carmen was saying, think about an intersectoral and integrated approach across Action Track 1, but also across the other action tracks within the process. And we want to ensure that we're making strong links with our partners within UNGAI, within WHO, within WFP and others, leading on these action tracks for those sort of integrations and ensure that they're coming through so strongly. I also wanted to just acknowledge the input from teachers and how we see teachers as so central to tackling violence and preventing violence within and around schools. Not only violence taking place within schools, but also violence taking place within the community, which obviously has such a huge impact on children's ability to learn. And finally, I just wanted to encourage everyone on the call who's been involved in the Safe Learning sub-theme to date to please continue to send through to UNESCO the best practices and examples that we can on how we can yeah, we would encourage everyone to continue to share those best practices on this sub-theme as well, to feed into not only the June but the September summits. That's it from Safe to Learn. Thank you very much.
Ms. Taylor-Jackson, thank you sincerely. We appreciate what you've shared with us. The focus of the input from the teachers, as the teacher is one of the most important contact persons for learners, the issue of violence in its various forms. And then we all know about the Safe Schools framework that we would love every country to consider and take note of. Ladies and gentlemen, we can now move forward to Mr. Stuart James Cameron and Ms. Vina Baraman, coordinators for inclusion and equity. If they are present, may we kindly ask one of you to switch on your microphone? Thank you. I see Cameron is already on. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I am not sure if Wycliffe or Tiana is also on the call. He was actually the person who was mostly involved in co-coordinating with me. If he is, I'll maybe invite him to come in with some comments once I've given an initial reaction. I think these comments that have been coming in have been reflecting a lot of the discussion that we had previously within our sub-theme around creating equitable and inclusive systems. We settled on a kind of headline of counted, participating, achieving, meaning that all children should be counted, both in the statistical sense and in the sense of being valued and taken into account by governments. Participating, meaningful participation in schools and in learning, and that includes, of course, things like being safe at school and having one's health and nutrition needs attended to, and achieving, so that we're focused on learning outcomes as well as their presence in the classroom. We recommended in this sub-theme paper the type of twin track approach, which is commonly brought up within disability inclusion perspectives, to be applied more broadly across a range of equity and inclusion issues. So it's not just about children with disabilities, although children with disabilities we know to be one of the most marginalized groups. That means promoting the culture of inclusion on the one hand, and providing targeted support to those at highest risk of exclusion on the other. I mean, I'm happy to see that with many of the comments and questions that have come in so far, that seems to be quite in line with what people are talking about. We suggested 5 key actions which we thought had some transformative potential, and these are deliberately selective and focused on particular areas, and includes building and improving school facilities so that all children have access, including to pre-primary, primary and secondary schools, creating and distributing learning and teaching resource materials in accessible formats, as well as in local languages, and training teachers on how to use them. Generating more data on evidence to identify who is excluded, and building education system capacity to plan, monitor, and report on inclusion and equity. And finally, removing the institutional barriers that exclude and segregate children, including things like fees and other costs, high-stakes examinations, and the reliance on separate segregated schools for children with disabilities. I would be, of course, interested to hear others' responses on this selection. It's there in the sub-theme paper, which will be shared. And I don't know if Wycliffe is also on this call today. I can see his name in the list, so perhaps you'd like to come in with some additional comments.
there, but
Mr. Cameron, thank you sincerely. Wycliffe, I see that you are on board. Would you like to say something briefly? We've got 10 more minutes. We still want to hear briefly what you say before we move on to Justine Suss and her team. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanet, and let me donate my time for the next session and approve of the presentation by James.
Wycliffe, could you kindly just bring the microphone closer? We can't hear properly.
I'm so sorry for that. You can hear me now? Yeah, this thing keeps on clipping. I was saying that I second and approve of the input by James, and I would want to donate the rest of the time to the next section. Over, thanks.
Wonderful, yeah, quite an elaborative overview that Mr. Cameron provided us, and we wish to reiterate your stance. Every child is important. There's no child more superior than the other. They may have different needs, but every child matters. All right, thank you very much. Can we now move to Ms. Justine Suss, her colleagues, Ms. Antara, and then Yona Nestel. They were the co-coordinators for gender transformative education. And I see Justine is already on her post, ready to speak to us. Thank you, Justine. We'd like to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Sadet. I helped coordinate the discussion paper, so I'll perhaps speak now, but Angai and Plan will be taking the work forward on this. The gender transformative paper, the paper on gender transformative education is really looking at moving beyond gender parity, equal numbers of girls and boys in classrooms, and really transforming education to remove gender bias, to look at changing social norms both in and outside of the classroom that are holding learners back. It's really looking at changing attitudes and practices and gender norms, harmful gender norms. The paper includes obviously a focus on education budgets, so making sure that budgets are focusing on tackling gender inequalities and exclusion. It talks about putting gender at the heart of education sector plans. It calls for better data because often we don't have the data that we need to ensure that we're taking the right action to support gender equality. It recognizes children, young people, and feminist civil society actors as key to supporting gender transformative education. And it also calls for what we've heard from a number of the other speakers around sort of intersectoral whole school approaches that are creating the inclusive spaces that we all want. The last thing I'll say on this is just that beyond the paper itself, we see gender as being very important across all action tracks. And so we have, as was mentioned earlier, put together a guidance note to inform the other action tracks. And that includes obviously thinking about the gender digital divide in the action track, looking at digital learning and transformation, supporting gender responsive pedagogy among teachers. And there's a wealth of other recommendations there, but that's just a few words from my side on the gender transformative education paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. Ladies and gentlemen, our coordinators, core coordinators, we can't imagine all the hours of negotiating on the correct terminology, negotiating which input to use, how to put it. We want to sincerely thank you, and I think we can all give them a deaf sign of thank you to everybody who has worked so hard on coordinating this and just, making sure that everybody is on board and that there's synergy and understanding. So our gratitude goes to you all. I have 5 more minutes. I just wish to reiterate that it is important that we come up, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners, esteemed stakeholders, role players, member states. It's important that we come up with key transformative measures and actions, be it for the short term, immediate, whether it is COVID response, whether it is war and conflict area, in emergency responses, whether it is whatever the situation is right now that requires us to act and to act promptly and efficiently with the necessary resources, we need to have that commitment. We also need to look at the midterm. We still have the SDGs. We were still lagging behind. It didn't change. So what are we going to do about that? And then, of course, as it was said earlier, we need long-term planning, 7 years, 15 years. How do we see transformation taking place in terms of education over this period? And I think with that, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the conclusion. I would now like to hand over to Wycliffe to just guide us if there is a specific wrap up that they would like to have. Lastly, before I go, please, just a big thank you to each and everybody who gave their time to be part of these discussions, the time and the energy, and who took the time also to provide answers and their views and let their voices be heard. We sincerely value that. So thank you from my side, from Namibia. I now hand over to Wycliffe to take us through the last part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edie Sanet, for that able steering of that section and a very great summary in terms of what has come out, and also to all the contributors for that. That is one of the most key segments of this particular session. Colleagues, as you know, this has been a long journey leading us up to where we are, but the journey is not yet ended. We are actually right on course. And so we will be talking through that, granted what has happened so far and the meetings that we've had today, the deliberations that we've had, where are we going forward from here? And as I mentioned before, we have two agencies providing technical support in this, UNICEF and UNESCO. And my very dear and able colleague, Justine, will take us through on the next steps. Then we'll have, after her, we'll have a closure by one of our co-leads, that is Italy, and Gianluca will come and close the session for us. Over to you, Justine.
Thank you, Wycliffe. And if I can ask Regina to put the presentation back up so you can see some of the next steps for us in terms of the way forward. The first thing I'd like to note is that we have a new website, which is for the tests, and it includes pages for each of the action tracks. Inside those pages, we have a discussion forum for track 1, and we have launched the similar questions as to what we've discussed today. So really trying to get more inputs from people on what they see as key elements of transformation. How can we move from theory to practice? So we have launched a question today on the discussion forum. We'll be sharing it more widely. Also encourage you to also share it with other people. It is a platform for us to get, again, more information on what you see as important to be included in the discussion paper, included in the pre-summit, and included in the summit as key transformative actions underneath this action track. There is an email which is also being created. I am not sure it's active yet, but it will also be a second touch point, as it were, for people to provide inputs, largely, as we are told, for member states in particular. But we encourage you to rather go to the discussion forum website rather than going through email if possible. While we have these questions now, we will have other questions coming up in the lead up to the pre-summit and the summit. And so we encourage you to sign up for the discussion forum. I believe you get updates, but again, I just heard about this yesterday. So more information is forthcoming on this. The week of the 6th to the 10th of June, we will have a second public engagement moment similar to the one we're having today. The next one will focus more on good practices and innovations that are really looking at those that have transformative potential, and that would be to inform the high-level policy dialogue at the pre-summit. And it will also be contributing to what's being called an investment case for transforming education. We will also be looking at proposed initiatives for global cooperation, building on existing coalitions, partnerships, and platforms. And this responds to one of the comments that was made in the discussion on how will we leverage a number of these important initiatives that are certainly moving us in the right direction. You may be aware that there is another work stream also looking at beyond the action tracks, looking at the national consultations, and this is an ongoing process. So far, we have a guidance note for the national consultations. There are national conveners that have already been decided for a number of countries, as you can see on the screen here. In 88 countries, the resident coordinators have confirmed interest and will soon be receiving funds. to support the national consultations. And the national consultations that are completed by the pre-summit will have an opportunity to feed into some of the points that are emerging from that in the pre-summit. The papers that you have seen, the discussion papers, will be informing the national consultations. They're essentially also guidance documents to help the discussions, as well as the actions that will be identified through the national consultations. If you can go to the next slide, please. On that slide, you'll see that in addition to the national consultations, we're also aiming to leverage a number of regional meetings that will take place for further discussion. In a number of these, there will also be some recommendations emerging from them that will come into the pre-summit. So you can see them here for the Middle East and North Africa, one in Africa in honor of Africa Day. That's actually an online forum. One in Latin America, and then the Asia Pacific Regional Education Ministers Conference, which is also coming up. There may be other ones as well that will come together, but these are the ones that we're aware of right now. The pre-summit obviously will be a very important moment. So the pre-summit is now the 28th to the 30th, with the 28th being an additional, what we're calling day of engagement. There will be a youth forum on that day. There is likely to be opportunity for private sector discussions. The action tracks will have some space to also bring together and convene in the lead up to the actual ministerial event during the summit, the pre-summit, sorry. Many people are asking us about whether side events are possible, what the process is for side events. Unfortunately, we have not had confirmation on this yet, but we will be sharing this as soon as possible and encourage you to continue to work, if you're part of already this process of consultations, to continue to engage with it. And if not, we encourage you to keep on looking at the website for more information as things come together. The summit itself will be on the 19th of September. It will take place at the UN General Assembly. We understand that there will not be side events during the summit, but again, there may be opportunities for engagement beforehand. Watch the space. That is also to be confirmed. The other thing I would say is that there is the third work stream, which is looking at opportunities for public engagement. So that will include communication activities, campaigns, other engagement on the web. And so you also will be invited to participate in that process. Essentially, as has been said a number of times during today's call, it is very much looking at inclusive approaches beyond the action track. It's also very much looking at inclusion as a process to help us get to where we need to be for action track 1 and the recommendations emerging from it. So please do continue to give us your opinions, your thoughts, your perspectives. Continue to share good practice. The website will be open up, we understand, in the lead up to the summit itself in September. So there are plenty of opportunities for you to engage throughout here and help inform the process. We also encourage you through the national consultations, the regional meetings, or any other opportunity to also be interfacing with member states to also look at commitments that will be made on at the summit itself in September, and obviously the follow-up after that. So I will stop there in terms of other key moments of engagement and pass it over back to my co-lead, back to the co-lead from Italy, Luca Grandi, please, to close today's event. Thank you.
Justine, thank you very much. So, dear colleagues, now in the summing up of our discussions, allow me to sum up some key results that I've noted. So, from our debate, financing and political will seem to be the key elements to trigger transformative education. We should have a political commitment at the highest level, accompanied by adequate financing. We must ensure the continuation of those 262 million students out of school, but at the same time, we need to think about those students who continue their learning pathway to recover learning losses, ensuring them the acquisition of adequate competences, including digital competences. Mainstreaming, another point, mainstreaming gender equality in all the action has been considered as a major element, putting gender equality at the center of planning, data implementation, and oversight. At the horizontal level, also implementing gender equality and sexual education has been considered very useful. Government should lead the action through the whole government multi-sectoral approach and collaborative effort between various partners, including parents, the whole school community, which put at the center learners' need, particularly their socio-economic health status, in order not to leave anyone behind. Adopt a holistic approach to ensure quality education, taking into account also the teaching of arts and physical education. It is fundamental to ensuring inclusive education to students with disability. Moreover, if we want to trigger transformative education, we must support students and teachers who are the main agent of change, building innovative, safe and healthy school environments which have had an important impact on learning outcomes and ensuring continuous professional development of teachers. We cannot achieve learning without taking into account student health and nutrition, ensuring healthy diet to our students at global level. We need an integrated package of policies to ensure that, as the African Union has highlighted. And we must also prevent violence at school and discrimination. Finally, we can ensure equal opportunity with free access to education, eliminating fees. These are some of the inputs that we received and that I draw up from the discussions. And I would like to thank you all for your participation, your engagement in this exercise, where your contribution is most valued by all the colleagues and all the staff and the experts. So I'm really looking forward to see you again in the week of the 6th and 10th of June to continue our discussions and to progress on the path of transforming our education system and put education at the center of the attention of the international fora. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Italy. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It was lovely to meet all of you. See you.